Welcome to I Could Talk to You All Day. I'm Lauren Lefkowitz, recovering workaholic, perfectionist, and people pleaser.
And I'm John Spears, emerging from playing small, getting caught up in the inertia of life, and always being on.
I Could Talk to You All Day is a show for executives and emerging leaders. This is not just another leadership podcast. We're here to talk about what it means to be a leader while also being human.
So join us for raw, vulnerable, and probably pretty funny conversations about shifting from surviving at work and home to thriving in the life you've always wanted. Let's get the conversation started. Hey, Lauren.
Me? Lauren?
Yeah, you.
Oh, hey, John.
Hey, it's you.
It's me.
That's what you say. You say that
That
to
is
me.
what I say. Oh,
Yeah.
hey, it's you. I even start my newsletters out that way.
I know. I get your newsletters. And so
I
I
know.
see often, oh, hey, it's you. And I'm like, yeah, duh, it's me. My name is John Spears. It's on the subject line. Come on. I love that we start our calls or our podcast or our recordings or our show, whatever you want to call this, laughing. We laugh, I think, a lot. And I just want to lift the veil a bit. This is pretty much a ritual that we do before we record. Both Lauren and I love crystals. No, we do, but we love Bridesmaids.
I thought we weren't going to talk about crystals again.
We're not talking about crystals. I was just putting it out there. We love the movie Bridesmaids. And every time, instinctively, intuitively, without any sort of prompting from each other, one of us always says,
ready to party.
And so Kristen Wiig, cast of Bridesmaids, if you're listening to this podcast, we just want you to know that we have a ritual. It involves you. We don't do guests on the show, but we would 100% do anyone that worked on Bridesmaids. The puppies, any cast member, any extra, any behind the scenes person. This is your open invite. I'm just going to make an executive decision that even though we don't do guests, we would entertain a proposal from someone who's in the bride.
Maya Rudolph, Melissa McCarthy, Melissa McCarthy's husband, whose name I can't remember, but he's funny too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wilson Phillips.
Sure.
We would do that.
Yeah.
How's it going over there?
I'm doing all right. I'm feeling pretty neutral today. I've been doing some hard therapy work. So there's been a lot of tears the last couple of weeks. And a lot of processing of grief. And I feel like I'm starting to emerge from that. So that's kind of neat. And it still also feels never ending.
Yeah. No.
Right. It's like the good and the bad, right? Once you start doing the work, you want to keep doing the work. And every time you get through some of the work, you're like, that work was worth doing. I feel so good about that work. And then you're like, look left. And there's more work to do.
I love that.
And I'm like,
look left. You have not arrived.
This better be worth it too.
It's funny. We were on a call with some other coaches yesterday, and I've shared this with you, this experience with you, and I shared it with them. And when I started doing a lot of work on myself, like therapy, but also some personal development, coaching stuff, there was this huge amount of like low-hanging fruit stuff. It was like super easy. It was, the kind of the outer layers of the onion where I was like, oh, I can just change this little thing. And I saw all these great results. And then you get a few layers down and like all the low-hanging fruit is gone. There's no low-hanging fruit left except for like the deep stuff that is deeply ingrained mindsets, ways of being, ways of thinking, ways of doing. And you get to that point and you're like, oh crap, like it's not easy anymore. And to your point, you kind of have to decide, am I willing to do that kind of work? And to your point also, there are times when I'm like, what is this for? This feels really hard. It feels really overwhelming. I'm sort of cycling through the same stuff over and over again. And then when you finally learn the lesson, you finally kind of make it through a little bit, you're like, oh God, that was so worth it. But it freaking sucked
Yes.
every minute of the way through that onion peel.
So true. Yeah.
Look left. That's going to be my new thing.
Oh no, there's more.
There's more. There's always more. And I think for us as humans, or particularly as me as a really type A human, I'm always about the destination. I remember even as a kid, I hated, hated, hated car rides. I didn't like road trips. I didn't like the process. I was always waiting for like the next thing, the next grade, the next merit badge, the next experience. And I had a really hard time being in the journey, just being in the journey for the journey's sake. And I am so grateful for that shift. I even love driving and car trips and road trips. I drove with my cousin a few years ago the entire length of the state of Montana, which is like 11 hours. It was the most boring ride ever, but we listened to a cool audiobook, and it was like really cool to kind of experience the journey without feeling like you wanted every minute to just pass faster and faster and faster.
Yeah. I'm going on a road trip next week to Lake Michigan, and the drive is about 10 hours. And my friend and I are staying overnight in Cleveland on the way there so that we have a breaking point.
You will be at a breaking point.
Yeah. Driving through Ohio. Yeah. So I'm excited for it. I haven't gone on like a long road trip with a buddy in a lot of years. And so I'm really excited to just like be on the road trip, listen to an audiobook and some music and chat. We'll let Puppy do some of the driving so we can nap.
Nice.
And just kidding. Puppy's a terrible driver.
I was going to ask, Puppy's going?
Yeah, she is coming. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm excited about that, and just to have some like quiet thinky time.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Enjoy that journey.
Thank you.
So Lauren, today we're going to talk about something that I'm currently experiencing. I think a lot of us experience it, but I'm kind of in the middle of it. And that is, what do you do when you don't know what to do? When you're at a crossroads to make a decision, when there's maybe some stuff in your life that's not working, and you just don't know what to do or how to get out of it or how to change your perspective or even what the next right step to take is. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like that experience that where you're just kind of, it's not necessarily stuck, but you need to make a decision, or you want to make a decision, and you just don't even know how to do it or where to go or how to approach it.
This is going to be the shortest episode ever, because just hide under the bed. Thanks for joining us today.
I wish that was the answer. I love to hide under the bed.
Yeah, it's such a great topic, because no matter how indecisive or decisive you are, when you have a thing to make a decision on that feels like it's impactful, like, not should I have peanut butter and jelly or should I have an egg salad sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, because mayonnaise is off limits. I saw your eyes go big. We can talk about that on another episode, but no to mayonnaise.
Just for our listeners, I love mayonnaise. I have lots of recipes with mayonnaise, sauces and marinades. So yes, let's save that for another show.
Yeah. But when you're making a decision that matters, that's going to matter past lunch, the overwhelm of making that decision, whichever side of the coin you're on, like super decisive, super indecisive, there can be this feeling of dread of like, what if I make the wrong decision? What if I go like so far down the path that I don't want to stop because of sunk costs? What if it's the right decision and then I'm super successful with it, like that's scary too. Like there's so many what ifs that play in our heads when we're in a decision phase.
And I don't know about you, but I am a very decisive person.
Same.
In work, in personal life, I gather data really quickly and I make a decision, and I'm usually okay to stick with that decision until I have a lot of data that shows me that I need to change course or alter course. So I'll make a decision and go with it. And so this is a really unusual experience for me to have, of not knowing what to do, kind of feeling
that you're currently having.
That I'm currently having. Yeah. Like, it's not like I'm paralyzed. I mean, maybe it is like I'm paralyzed, but I'm just sort of looking at all the data, like all the things, and saying, I just don't even know how to evaluate this incoming information. How do I value it or have a valuation for the pros and cons? Like, even that for me feels really overwhelming in this current experience that I'm in.
I super get that. And I am in a decision-making process about a few things in my business, and I'm feeling like I keep pushing off the decision and leaving ambiguity for my future because I don't want to do it wrong. And there's this like finiteness in my head when it comes to my business that if I do something wrong, it will be like very public, which isn't true. It's a story I'm making up. But I also am usually very decisive. And I listen to my gut, and my gut is usually like right on point and very quick. So when I struggle with something, all I want to do is hide under the bed, because I'm like, why am I struggling with this? Why don't I just know the answer? Why can't I just go ahead and do this or not do it and get it off get it out of my head? So it is frustrating. And I think that's like a pretty typical smart person, high achiever kind of, and especially when there's people pleasing and perfectionism mixed in, like beautiful recipe for being really overwhelmed and frustrated when you don't have that sort of immediate decision when you're used to it.
Yeah. I think normally when I'm in a quote good headspace, when I'm in a headspace of I'm practicing, I'm learning, I don't need to have all the answers, this is not a performance, I take things a little lighter and I'm more willing to play with it. I'm more willing to quote be wrong. I'm more willing to bring some levity in it. And I think in some of these decisions that I'm making, they feel really heavy. They feel really important and life-changing and serious. And I think maybe I'm answering my own question just a few minutes into this episode. I think when I get into that, it's serious, it's heavy, lots on the line. My kind of response to that, or my reaction to that, is, oh no, I can't, I overwhelm, too much data, too much information. I can't process. I can't synthesize. And so not only am I like hiding under the bed, I'm like putting my fingers in my ears saying la, 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 because it just feels really overwhelming for me when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I would rather, like, my default is that I would rather stand in place than risk falling backward when I'm trying to move forward. But not really. That's just my default. That's like my fear center talking and saying, like, you don't want to be wrong. You don't want to make the wrong decision. So just like stay here until you're either absolutely positive it's the right decision, or you decide not to do it because it's going to be the wrong decision. And it only hurts me, you know?
No, I was really struck by what you just said, which is like, sometimes we have this inclination or this desire just to stand still. And I'm really struck because I think that can be both good and bad. I remember hearing, I love like inspiration on social media, right? So I'm like listening to Oprah and like Oprah Daily and all these people. I'm just like, my feed is like, I'll go hours on a reels and be like, oh my God, that's so good. And then I'll get like a little like personal development overload. And it's like, oh my God, I can't deal with this anymore. But I remember hearing Oprah say something like, when you don't know what to do, the thing to do is just to be still and to like not make a decision and not to stand still. And I think that could be really valuable, but that's not, I don't think what we're talking about here.
No, that's like the elevated, evolved way to just like be with indecision, right? That's the end of our podcast. Not this is the end of our podcast, but like that's the lesson at the end of our podcast is like just be with it, like Oprah says, right? That's so evolved. My standing in place, and thank you for the credit you were trying to give me, but my standing in place is that like analysis paralysis. I'm going to think about it until I make a decision. I can't just sit and be with it and let it be. I mean, I can't I keep talking in these like binary ways, but I tell myself I can't, right? And you can hear it as I'm talking because I do default to like making these things definitives. I can't do it this way. I can't. And then I correct myself. By the way, that's part of the practice. If you're listening now and you're like, what does practice mean? That's part of the practice is catching your default and like talking about it so that you're not living in default all the time. But my default really is just like sit with it and make it all consuming. That's, I think, the difference is sit with it and like just let it come through you versus sit with it and think about it all the time. Even when you're doing things that are not it, like it will pop into your head and then you'll worry about it more. And then you'll have nightmares about it and you'll wake up in the morning thinking about it and on and on. And like not super healthy.
So I think what I hear you saying is there's really a distinction between not making a decision and being with it, being in the discomfort of it, being in the unknown of it, and truly being present in it. And not making a decision because you're paralyzed, because you're overwhelmed, because you're ruminating, because you're thinking through everything, because you're judging yourself for not making a decision, because you have all this energy that's kind of creating this anxiety and this chaos inside. There's a very real difference between those two experiences. And I totally know what you mean. I tend to live in the latter instead of that kind of like highly evolved, like I'm just going to sit with this and be curious and be open and be calm about it. I am often in the, oh my God, what do? I don't know what to do. And I can really like create a swirl of judgment and blame and kind of chaos and kind of that stokes the chaos feeling inside of me, as opposed to being okay with not knowing, being okay with being where we are, with accepting what is. And that's a real challenge for me. And I would assume a lot of other people, unless I'm real far back in the self-development space.
Yeah, I mean, it's evident in just the two of us talking who have been doing the work, right? We call it the work, but the work is like our own commitment to personal self-development, therapy, different kinds of coaches at different times, learning things like breath work, meditation, which I know you were already doing long before you and I met. But you know, these things we've put in place for ourselves, and yet so easy to come up with examples of how and when we go into this like overwhelm. So I'll just stand in place kind of feeling. And so I think it happens for everybody. And my panic response actually used to be, I felt like I had to make a decision because indecisiveness there was no space in my head for indecisiveness. I was so busy all the time. And so I would make a decision. And if it was for someone else, it was usually I'll do it. And if it was for me, I usually put it on the back burner. And the back burner got really full. But I was then making a decision to not do it. So there was no middle ground for me. I was either doing it or because it was like fast to fit in, or I felt like I had to, or I'm not doing it. I just didn't let anything sit in the middle. Now that I have done a bunch of work and I'm continuing to do the work and I have fewer work hours, now that I have more life hours. I'm not working all the time. I have more space for indecision, and it frustrates me because I sit with indecision and I just want to make those quick decisions. But what I know is that if I make a quick decision that is something for me or my business or my health, or, that if it doesn't feel like I can integrate it right this second and figure it out and do it and be done with it, I should say no. So for me, as it often is with a lot of things, it's in the pause and taking that pause and saying, what do I actually want here? Do I want to sit with indecision? Do I want to make a decision? What is the indecision? Right. And that's not fast. And that's so frustrating to not be able to just like move through a series of pre-written steps and handle it and be done with it. Like easy peasy.
Yeah, I really wish, I mean, I don't really wish, but I kind of wish there was like a set of steps for everything. There was like a manual for living life. Like in this circumstance, turn to page 1085 and here are the 3 things you need to do. That would be so much easier, I think, for me. Although it's not really what I want. It's kind of what I want sometimes. I love what you talked about, and it really made me think about the context in which I am viewing indecision, or the context in which I'm viewing not knowing what to do when I'm faced with a decision. And so I'd love for you to, we had a previous conversation about context. What is context in this regard? And what are some other ways that we can view kind of what we're talking about today from a different lens? I'm obviously viewing it through like, oh, indecision is bad, or like there's something wrong or whatever. And so when we talk about context, what is that? And how can we view not knowing what to do when you're faced with a decision through a different lens or a different set of lenses?
Cool. So context is a great time to bring it up because my relationship to indecision has changed because of context. So the context that I used to be in was that I am busy, my life is busy, work is busy, I serve other people first, therefore there is no time for indecision. So the baseline context was there is no time for indecision, and it was because of like reasons, right? And because I was in that context, my response to that context was, therefore, I will make quick decisions. Now my context is I have choice and freedom, and I get to decide on my impact on myself, on others, on the world. And therefore, I have more time on my hands to be with decisions. And unfortunately, I'm not yet at so here's what I do with that point in that context. And that's why I don't like indecision. So when your context changes, and sometimes that changes because you have a baby, sometimes that changes because you get a new job or you move or your health changes, right? Like it can be a whole bunch of things that impact the shift in your context and inform your new context. But the way I see context in general is like, this is possible or not possible, or something in between, because of the way I see it. And you said because of the lens I'm looking through. So if I change those glasses and I think about well, what if it wasn't this context? What other contexts are available to me? What other choices do I have in how I look at this? There's like new freedom, and it can also cause overwhelm. And sometimes I just go to my coach with that. And I just sort of like blurt out all the ways I see that it could be. And then I'm like, tell me what to do. And of course she doesn't, because that's not what coaches do. But she does help me sort through it. The other question you asked about like what to do, like where to get started, is start, right? Which is like, okay, Lauren, oversimplified. Thanks for giving us a one-step program. But starting means not doing all of it. I love the concept of what's the step before that.
Yeah.
So when my clients come to me with like, I need to do all of these things and I'm overwhelmed, so I'm not even starting it because I can't do the whole thing and I feel like I should do the whole thing. And I ask, like, what is step one? Step one is usually step 42, right? So then I ask, what's the step before that? And what's the step before that? And what's the step before that? Until you literally get to the first step. And I'm not talking about like dumbing it down to the point where you're like, pull out a piece of paper and a pen. I'm talking about deciding what the first concrete step is that you're going to take. And it can be a being step or a doing step. But deciding what your first step is. And then once you figured out your first step, figure out your second step, knowing that you're only going to do the first step so that you see a direction.
Mm-hmm.
Then, after you finish step one, plan step 3 so that you can do step 2, looking forward at step 3. Now, you may have outlined all of these steps because you were at step 706 and you had to back into step 1. So like keep that list, but put it somewhere else. And once you've got step 2 done, you plan step 4 and you do step 3 and so on until either you want to do more than one step at a time because you don't feel that overwhelmed because you're deep enough into it, or you just keep doing that until you get to the end. And then your last step is freaking celebrate. And maybe you have steps in between that are milestones, that are celebrations, right? Depending on the size of the project or decision or whatever it is, you get to decide, when do I celebrate? Maybe I celebrate after every step. Maybe I celebrate after X number of months of continuing with the thing, or whatever sort of building milestone that you get to. But we forget to celebrate ourselves and our achievements. And we think we can only do that when we've accomplished something very big and it's completely done. And that's a whole other episode.
Yeah, celebration.
Important. Yeah.
Yeah, I
How
think
about
celebration.
you? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think celebration is so important, and we don't do enough of it in our lives to recognize key accomplishments, ritual, things that really acknowledge what we're doing, who we're being, our efforts that we're putting into things. And so I love us maybe talking about celebration and acknowledgement in another episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I think. What do you think, John? Where do you start when you're in indecision?
Well, where I start and where I actually start are two different places. Where I start is like a lot of rumination, a lot of hand wringing, a lot of worry, a lot of overwhelm. And then once I let that play out a little bit, I'm tired of that BS. I kind of take a big step back. And I always start with asking myself some questions that are able to really help guide me through decision making. So before I make a decision, any kind of decision, even if I feel like a decision is readily available for me, I always ask myself, what am I committed to around this? What are the things that I want to see? What do I want to create? How do I want it to go? What do I want it to look like? Because that really informs the how, which happens, I think, down the line a little bit. And I also ask myself questions around values and who I want to be. So the three kind of sets or buckets of questions are really about, how do I want to show up? How do I want to be in the world? What attributes or characteristics do I want to embody in this experience? What are my values? What are those sort of guiding principles that I have that really guide my being, my day-to-day doing, et cetera? And then what is it that I'm committed to? They're three distinct buckets, but they really help me get really centered and grounded, because I find that when I have a hard time making a decision with something, there's oftentimes I'm disconnected from myself a bit. I'm disconnected from who I am in the world, for who I want to be in the world. And those questions really ground me and center me into myself, as opposed to using external things to help guide that. What do other people think? Are people going to be satisfied with this decision? Is it going to make other people happy? And I was actually just working with a client just before this show and was talking a lot about that. It's like, your responsibility is keeping your side of the street clean.
Mm-hmm.
It's not how other people are going to react. It's not other people's expectations or their preferences. They're all going to respond the way they respond. And we need to have as much connectedness to who we are in order to make decisions that we're going to be happy with or proud of making, even if it's not the right decision, right? Even if we go and need to make some course corrections down the future. But having that kind of vision of who we are, who we want to be in the world, those values and those commitments really helps in flexibility. It helps in kind of bringing energy for me into the decision as opposed to making a decision begrudgingly. And I also think I've really taken on this idea of making decisions with a whole body yes. I used to make decisions where I just didn't feel right about them. I knew something was off and I would make them anyway. And now really looking internally at, is my whole body vibing with this answer? Is the energy around this answer the energy that's going to drive me to a yes or a no? And I found that's like super, super helpful for me when I just don't know what to do. Because my kind of challenge is in the doing. I can get really caught up in the doing of it. But knowing my what for, my why before I go into the how is super helpful for me. I don't always get it right. It's kind of messy sometimes, but making decisions from that place is always way more empowering than any other place.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you had any closing thoughts for our audience.
I do. I think something that's so important to remember is that with almost anything in your whole life, you can choose again.
Mm.
We wait to decide because we're afraid to make the wrong decision. At least that's how it is for me. I am allowed to decide today, and tomorrow I'm allowed to change my mind. I'm allowed to decide again or recommit, right? But we forget that almost no choice is final. And I say almost because, like, if I go to the spa and spend $1,000, I can't decide to unspend that $1,000 after I've done it, right? There are things that have like a finite decision, but the big things in our lives, in work, in relationships, in how we choose to spend our time and energy, we can choose again.
Mm. That is so powerful. And I would just add something to that. One, you can choose again. And two, everything is figure outable. So
Yes.
Let's say you go to the spa and you spend $1,000 they don't have. You can figure that out. There is a solution there to solve for that challenge or that problem. And I love that, the freedom that comes with you can choose again. There's going to be another opportunity to choose or to change your mind or to course correct. And everything is figure outable.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Thanks so much for joining us, and can't wait to talk to you next time.
We're so grateful you decided to be with us during this episode. Subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues, and join us next time for more Real Talk.